Esiet sveicināti visi tie, kuri veiksmīgi
Everyone who's joined us online and our first green meetup destinations, COP26, hosted by British Embassy in Riga. My name is Kristaps, and a warm welcome from me as well. So if you're still joining, we'll let you do that. We will take a moment to complete the registration for the Green Meetup. We have 3 working languages: English, Russian and Latvian, so choose language which suits you best.
It just means that you have clicked on the wrong link and you're listening up to the Latvian translation, so I'll switch it up. There's a special link where you can listen to the whole meetup in English. The translation will be available in 3 languages, so please use that. Dāmas un kungi, ja nu gadījumā jūsu draugi paziņ.
So if your friends and anyone you know would like to still join our green meetup, let them know, send them a link. Today's event brings together experts from the UK and Latvia to discuss climate change and what governments should do to reduce our contribution to climate change and how to promote sustainable lifestyle across our societies. There's a lot to be done, and there are good advices to follow. The Green Meetup consists of 3 sessions or 3 steps that we are going to go through in the coming couple of hours to better understand what causes climate change and what are the consequences of the climate change. The first step, Think Green, will consist of inspirational stories of environmental thinkers and doers from their personal life, switching to sustainable lifestyle and behavior in their personal life and business life, what they do on a daily basis in terms of us being sustainable. Are there any behaviors that we should teach our children or colleagues that we work with? So this is what we are going to discuss in the first step. The second step, Speak Green, will consist of panel discussion on climate neutrality tools and practices with participation policymakers and the consequences of action, or rather inaction, on the part of the people. And the third step, Act Green, is a quiz in cooperation with the Latvian Fund for Nature on climate change and sustainability. So thank you everyone for joining our today's workshop. We have a lot of inspirational and interesting speeches to come, and I hope that you will enjoy this event. And I'm once again Kristaps, and I'll guide you through today's event. And now I would like to give the floor to the Ruth Rajavich-Bissall, Deputy Ambassador and Lead on Climate Work at the British Embassy in Riga, to open the meet.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Green Meetup, our very first Green Meetup. As Kristaps said, I am Ruth Rajavich-Bissall. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission, or Deputy Ambassador, at the British Embassy in Riga, and I lead on all of our climate work. The British Embassy in Riga has always taken an interest in climate change, or the climate change agenda, but this year is particularly important for us because we're hosting COP26, which is going to be in Glasgow in November. And we hope to have this as an in-person summit. And if so, it will be the largest summit that the UK has ever hosted, with 30,000 delegates. So that's a bit about the embassy. I myself have always had an interest in the environment. I studied biology and environmental science at university. And I also try to make greener choices. So if I'm going to the supermarket, I take cloth bags with me. I use solid soap, shampoos. I choose loose fruit and vegetables, so I try and make lifestyle choices that are a little bit greener. And the embassy also is making an effort. We're trying to be a bit more sustainable. We have a hybrid electric vehicle for the ambassador. So those are the sort of things that we're trying to do. But in preparation for COP26, we've been involved in quite a lot of events. So this one today. I'm really looking forward to today's event. But we also participated in the Lampa Conversation Festival in September last year, where we had a panel discussion on green finance. So we tried to define what green finance was and how society could benefit from that. And then last week or a couple of weeks ago, I was involved in the Youth Climate Forum, which we co-hosted with the Duke of Edinburgh International Award Scheme here in Latvia. And we had about 30 young adults who joined that. They got into groups together to discuss how they could make. They came together to discuss solutions on how they could make their environment more green, and they came up with sort of ideas for 30-day challenges and apps, and also it was really inspiring. So that was really, really good. And then today is our sort of main event as such. And the other things we've been doing in the embassy is we've shared with Latvia, and will continue to share, the UK's experience on the Climate Change Act, because Latvia is putting together their own climate law. We're also working with Latvia on a basic version of the 2050 energy and emissions calculator, and that calculator will provide an additional tool for the Latvian government and for stakeholders to ensure that Latvia meets its emissions targets. The UK has also set out a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So this plan includes commitments on offshore wind, low-carbon hydrogen production, electric vehicles and nuclear. So today we've brought together climate experts and activists, so people with interest in making things better and achieving our targets, both from the UK and Latvia. So we're hoping today will help raise awareness of these issues and for people to take action. So I hope you find today really interesting and useful. I'm really looking forward to it, like I said. And if you're not already thinking about the environment and any changes that you can make, I hope this session will inspire you. I'm hoping it's going to inspire me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. I think in life there's multiple maybe areas in life, maybe particularly in business, then where you want to keep things in secret. Maybe there's this product that you want to take. Hey, this is going to benefit me and will profit and so forth, but not in climate change ideas, not in climate change some initiatives that we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Pirmā sesija, domā zaļi.
The first session, Think Green, has presentations from 4 experts from the UK and Latvia, and they will give their examples of sustainable living on personal and business levels. So everyone who's joined us, you have also a wonderful opportunity, wherever you are, at home or at work. Following our meetup, you have an opportunity to ask questions. As presenter speaks, you can just type a comment on Facebook, ask a question to the presenter or to the speaker. You can send it to the phone number that you can see below, 267 6361 is the phone number. You can send your text messages and WhatsApp messages to ask the questions that you have to any of the speakers, or we will also ask them in the question and answer session after the interventions. Now it's my honor to give the floor to international award-winning environmental photographer Mandy Barker. He'll share her experience, tell us her story of how she makes her photos, images, and what she has come to understand about the environment and nature through her work.
Latvia, thank you for asking me to speak on behalf of the British Embassy. I'm just going to briefly talk through my work and relate that to, what's going to happen at COP26.
Thank you.
So marine plastic debris is plastic that has been created and manufactured on land and that has somehow found its way into the sea through bad waste management. And here you can see me on the west coast of Scotland with just an example of some of the amount of plastic that is washing up in oceans around the world. I first started kind of noticing this more than 10 years ago, and I've been photographing marine plastic debris for more than 10 years, just only marine plastic debris. This particular issue just completely shocked me when I found like a children's car seat, a fridge freezer, a computer washing up on the east coast of England, just where I used to live. I realised that I wanted to try and engage audiences to try and understand what was going on. Maybe people that live in land and don't actually go to the coast. Initially, I began to photograph items as I found them on the shoreline like this, but I realised that people weren't really interested in seeing rubbish because, you know, it's quite a common phenomenon at the moment. So I realised that I had to collect the objects and bring them back to the studio and try and give them some sort of aesthetic visual attraction to try and attract people to look at the rubbish and then read the information and the captions as to what it was representing. So here you can see fishermen's gloves and plastic bags. And I just gave the simple caption of the amount of years it took for each of these plastic items to degrade in the ocean. For example, 30 years for PVC plastic fishermen's gloves on the right-hand side there to degrade. So all of these different plastic objects, I created a timeline. You can see the orange plastic bag there took 1 to 3 years to degrade. And then at the end of the timeline is a piece of styrofoam or polystyrene, which is aerated plastic, which never ever goes away. It's always with us somewhere on the planet. And in the middle there, you can see the base of a plastic bottle, which takes 450 years to degrade in the ocean. Since science has moved on, they say that plastic, all plastic that's ever produced, is still with us somewhere on the planet. After I did more research into the plastic that was existing in my local area, I realised that this was a common problem around the world. And this particular image shows 276 pieces of plastic that was recovered from the stomach of an albatross chick. This is a 30-day-old juvenile albatross bird. This image shows objects collected from several albatross juvenile chicks. And what was particularly horrific for me was that the Epsom inkjet cartridge there is the inkjet cartridge that I use in my printer at home. And to think that this object could be found in the stomach of a bird was something that shocked me beyond belief and just made me feel that I would never ever give up this subject. After I'd photographed single objects, I decided it would be really good to represent the mass accumulations that are existing in the ocean. So this image is called Soup Refused, and this is based on a collection of plastic that was from the island in Greece. And basically on the shoreline, goats were eating plastic and then spitting out the plastic into the sea, and that was being carried back out into the ocean. So this is another example of a land animal which is interacting with plastic. This is called Soup Turtle, and this is based on children's bath toys, floating bath toys that fell from a container ship in 1992. And these bath toys circulated all around the world, and oceanographers have made many different discoveries on where they were ended up. Some were found in the Arctic, frozen in the Arctic, and then they thawed and then kind of carried on their journey around the rest of the world. Just to show an example of how marine creatures and birds could mistake plastic for food, on the left-hand side here is a ball of monofilament fishing line, and on the right-hand side are fish eggs. So it's quite easy for creatures to mistake plastic for food. Using the monofilament fishing line, I created this image called Bird's Nest Soup, and this is based on a swarm of jellyfish, and just to show the amount of plastic that's floating in the oceans. This image is almost like a kind of a full stop. It's to represent the fact that 500 plus pieces of plastic were found in one albatross. So there's 500 and more pieces there that are in a compact arrangement, a bit similar to how probably the plastic would exist in the stomach of the bird. Another project I did was I thought it would be really good to try and link people around the world to be involved in my work. So I put out a social media call for people to collect footballs or soccer balls from their local beach and to post them to me so that I could create an image. You know, unlike COP26, when all, you know, kind of international leaders and people are coming together, I thought this would be a global representation of a plastic issue and problem. So people started to send me footballs from all around the world, and this particular man sent 228 from the west coast of Scotland. And in the end, I received 769 footballs from all over the world. And I created this image called Penalty the World. The series is called Penalty because in the game of football, penalty is an error or a mistake. And I think this is quite appropriate because penalty is the price that we're all going to pay if we don't do something about this plastic issue. I work with scientists a lot in my work, which is what underpins, kind of what I do, the scientific research, the plastic, the effects on animals, etc. This is an example of an expedition that went to Henderson Island in 2019. And I was very lucky to join these scientists to this remote location. As you can see, it's one of the remotest places on the planet. It's isolated right in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean. And unfortunately, in 2017, it was named one of the most plastic polluted beaches on the planet. It's the most stunning, uninhabited coral atoll, one of only 2 coral atolls in the world. And it has endemic species and birds that live nowhere else on the planet. Unfortunately, the beaches were actually covered in plastic. This is an example of me photographing some of the plastic in a cave on Henderson Island. I created images based on the amount of plastic we found on the island. Incidentally, the island is more than 5,000 kilometres from the nearest major landmass. So all these objects have travelled more than 5,000 kilometres to reach this remote island. And we found 45 different logos and brands from companies that made plastic and from more than 25 different countries. So it's absolutely shocking to think that this plastic has travelled this distance to end up in this remote, pristine UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is a detail of some of the objects we found. As you can see, shampoo bottles, bleach bottles, packaging, and these marks are actually from sharks or fish or turtles that have actually bitten pieces out of the plastic. So my work is created as an intention to be attractive. This is what I aim to do so that people are drawn to the images and then they can read about the science, they can read about what I'm representing. And my work is published, it's been published in more than 50 different countries. This is an example of work published in National Geographic. Also, my work is exhibited around the world. This is an example of how it's possible to liaise with a community in Gexco in Spain. So my work isn't just seen in galleries because it's really important that people, can engage with it on a day-to-day basis, whether they're going to work, whether they're going shopping. It's really important that people do get the message of, the amount of plastic that's out in the ocean. And this is a really good way of doing it. This just shows the amount of coverage, really, of the plastic that I've collected from around the world. I think it's safe to say that I'm not just collecting plastic on my local beach. This is been from expeditions in the oceans and from many different places around the world. So you might be asking, what can we do? Well, on a basic level, you can refuse plastic. As Ruth mentioned earlier, there's many different alternatives to plastic. But at the moment, the critical point we've come to is that recycling just isn't enough. I mean, the amount of bottles and things I found on Henderson Island, which were recyclable bottles, still shows that, things are ending up there. What we really need to do is design out waste in the beginning. So we need to make products that don't ultimately end up as plastic waste, and then we have nothing to get rid of. So COP26 is our chance to engage with world leaders, climate experts, heads of state from all around the world. It's a time to come together to talk about this and to put in, international legislation to tackle this problem. And if you'd like to see any more about my work and what I do, then you can visit my website. Just to leave you with an example of quite often what my suitcase looks like when I go on holiday. I just collect plastic from wherever I go, and this is a result of my return. So Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mandy. It's so powerful. Those pictures, your work, how you actually present them. That's so powerful. The question would be: have you? You mentioned the birds and the bird chicks and all the plastic that the scientists and ornithologists found in their stomach. As you mentioned, there was a printer cartridge. The same as you use, yes? Was that the most shocking or the most powerful message sent also to you and maybe people around you? Hey, listen, these chicks are eating the cartridges, so how come they get into the environment? So
exactly, because as well as the cartridge in that picture, there were toothbrushes, cigarette lighters, golf balls. And nobody knows where they've come from. That could be the toothbrush that you used. That could be the cigarette lighter that you used, or the cartridge that's in your printer. Nobody really knows where they've come from, but there's a possibility that a plastic item that you've used could end up in the stomach of a bird. And yeah, you're right. I think that realization was I realized that it's just a subject and a critical climate issue that I just cannot turn away from.
Mandy, could you close up the Zoom window that is opened up on your screen, please, or stop the window sharing as well? So, yes, and would you say that you mentioned that we need to design out the waste? Is the humanity waiting for also for science to make faster strides towards some better solution, because the plastic has gotten so deep into our daily lives that we cannot get rid of it?
Yes, and lots of things are being done at the moment. There are lots of alternatives coming on board. It's just that the plastic issue is, somehow behind main climate change science, and we have to do a lot more science to kind of catch up with that. But a lot of things are being done. But the amount of plastic that, there's 300 million tons of plastic waste produced every year. And that's a huge problem. There's no point in running around cleaning it up and trying to manage it. It needs to be stopped at source so that this huge amount of plastic isn't left for us to get rid of.
Thank you very much for your presentation, for your work. And it was great to see it. And thank you, Mandy, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Dāmas un kungi, tā bija Mandy Barker, godalgota vides fotogrāfe, un ja vēlaties viņas darbu aplūkot, tad dodieties uz viņas mājaslapu mandy-barker.com, tur var apskatīt viņas darbus. Šajā brīdī mēs turpināsim attiecīgi ar kādu vēl prezentāciju, un I'm glad to welcome Professor of Environment Psychology at University of Bath. I welcome Lorraine Whitmarsh. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. It's really good to be with you this morning. I'll just share my screen. I've got a few slides. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I just want to talk about really why, but also how we should act on climate change, and really the importance of changing our own behaviour. Of course, we've seen from the IPCC reports, the scientific assessments, that climate change is really an urgent issue that we need to act on as soon as possible if we're to avoid the sorts of very dramatic impacts that we've already started to see. For example, the Australian bushfires, floods and other extreme weather events, disruption to food supplies, impacts in terms of migration of people, spread of disease and so on. So that the range of impacts is very wide-ranging. So we're going to be increasingly impacted by climate change. But also, climate change is not only a scientific issue, we have learned about it through science, but it is also an ethical and moral issue. The reason we can say this is because actually we know that the people that are going to be most affected by climate change are generally the people that have the least in society, that they are the poorest and most vulnerable. They're the least able to cope with and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And yet, those are exactly the people that have not actually caused climate change to the extent that more wealthy countries and individuals have. So income tends to be a very strong predictor of our carbon footprint. So the people who are impacted the most by climate change are the least to blame. Another ethical aspect is what's also called intergenerational justice. So this is particularly thinking about young people and how actually, because the worst impacts are going to be in the future, that will be the world that young people inherit. And yet young people, of course, are not necessarily able to participate in decision making as fully as adults. So they can't vote, for example, and yet they will experience the worst impacts in the future. So of course, young people are particularly concerned, particularly worried. And so we do need to think about the intergenerational, the kind of future generations aspect of the issue as well. What we also know is that in order to reach our very low carbon future that we need to get to very quickly, we need to not only have the right technologies and products, but we also need to change our lifestyles very significantly. So this figure here comes from a very recent report from the UK Committee on Climate Change, their 6th carbon budget report, where they calculated the contribution that can come from different sorts of measures to reach net zero emissions, so zero emissions. And you can see that while about 40% is technological change on its own, the rest of the changes required are at least to some extent behavioural and social change. So they require us to do different things in our day-to-day lives. What specifically are we talking about? Well, the sorts of behaviours that we need to change include changing our diets. So we need to eat more plant-based foods. We need to eat specifically less red meat and dairy. That has the highest carbon impact. We also need to waste less food. So we know that emissions from food waste are amongst the most powerful greenhouse gases. So cutting our food waste by planning meals and using leftovers, for example, is another good thing we can do. Mobility, so transport, particularly car travel and flying, is a very significant part of our carbon footprint. So the more we can walk and cycle, use public transport, the lower our carbon footprint will tend to be. And we can also replace journeys in some cases by doing things virtually like this. So we haven't had to emit any carbon to travel across Europe to be together. Other things that we can do include reducing the amount of new things that we buy, our material consumption. And so we can share things, we can reuse things, buy secondhand things, and so on, recycle as well, as we just heard. And we can use less energy in the home to heat and cool our buildings. So there's lots of things that we can do. These percentages, by the way, are roughly the amount that these different activities contribute to our carbon footprint. So you can see food and mobility alone makes up about half of our carbon footprint. But another argument for why we should change our behaviour is not only that by changing these things that I've just mentioned, we can cut our carbon footprint and help tackle climate change, but also because actually it can make us happier. So we know, for example, that while it is important to have a certain level of income to meet our basic needs, we need enough money to have a house and enough food, etc., and enough money to clothe ourselves. Actually, once you get to a certain level of income, people's happiness tends to kind of level off. So it's not the case that very rich people are much happier than people with moderate levels of income. And so that's what this figure basically shows, is that with different ways of measuring, well, happiness and well-being, so in terms of stress or how you evaluate your life or how happy you are, actually at a certain level of income that tends to kind of level off and you don't get any further benefit. And that's because material consumption, so buying lots of stuff and having a big house and traveling around the world, etc., doesn't really satisfy our psychological needs, our basic human needs, which are for being competent, so being good at something, feeling like you've achieved something, autonomy, so having some sense of kind of freedom and ability to make decisions for yourself, and relatedness. So in other words, having a kind of social support network, having friends and family that you can rely on and being part of a community. Those things are better satisfied in general by lower carbon activities. So think about creative hobbies and spending time with family and friends, gardening, being in green spaces. Those are things which generally have lower carbon footprints than consumption, shopping, and they make us much happier. But in other ways, actually, the sorts of changes that I've mentioned will also improve our lives. So I've mentioned eating more fruit and veg, eating less red meat, walking and cycling more. Those are things which will significantly improve our health, as well as cutting our carbon footprint significantly. And other things we can do, like saving energy in the home, that can often reduce our energy bills. So there will be a financial benefit. And more generally, as we think about recovering from COVID, the economic recovery that we need to make as a society, if we can invest in industries like insulation in homes or green technologies, the more we can create those sort of green jobs as we rebuild our economy, the more we can tackle climate change as well as have those economic benefits. The good news in terms of thinking about how to make this change is that actually there's a lot of public support for tackling climate change. So actually we found in our surveys, not just in the UK, but elsewhere, that concern for climate change has been rising over the last few years and actually has continued to rise a little bit even in 2020, when of course we were very worried also about COVID. So our concern has not been dented over the last year by the pandemic. And actually we see most people are also supportive of a green recovery from COVID. So they want to address climate change at the same time as addressing the need for economic recovery. But of course, those positive attitudes and that support amongst most members of the public for tackling climate change needs to be translated into action. And the good news is that COVID has in some ways provided an opportunity to actually change people's habits, because a lot of the things that we've been doing in the last few months in lockdown, involving traveling much less, saving water and energy at home in some cases, cutting food waste, we've seen a lot of people doing that, buying less, spending more time in the garden, reading, etc. Those sorts of things tend to have much lower carbon footprint than the things we were doing before the pandemic. And actually many people have said there are things about those changes that they've enjoyed and they want to maintain. But the key issue is how we actually retain those behaviour changes in the longer term. When restrictions are lifted from COVID, will we continue to do some of these things? And that completely depends on having the right infrastructure in place in cities and towns, and more widely, having the right technologies to support these changes, having the right social and economic policies in place. Because we know, and this figure comes from the United Nations Environment Programme emissions gap report that recently came out, we know that changing lifestyles requires not only awareness amongst the public, so we do need to give people information, but that alone is not enough. We also need structural change, so we need the economic policies, the infrastructure, etc. We need the social change, so we need public participation in activities, and we need to change norms and the sort of media context as well. And my final point is that the timing is also really important. So we have an opportunity as we transition out of lockdown and out of the COVID restrictions back into some level of normality. In order to retain the sort of low carbon habits that we've got, we need to really this is a golden opportunity, because habits tend to be a barrier to behavior change. But where there is this disruption to habits that the pandemic has caused, this is actually a good opportunity to get people to do things in new ways, because we know from previous studies like this one, where they gave people some information about the bus service in their area and a free ticket to try the bus. That was only effective for people who had recently moved house, and it increased bus use amongst that group very significantly, whereas it didn't have any effect on people that hadn't recently moved house. So actually periods of disruption provide really good opportunities to get people to do things in new ways. So just to finish, climate change is an urgent issue, but it's in order to address it, we need to change our lifestyles, but doing that will actually improve our lives in general. In order to change our lifestyles, we need to engage with people to understand what's important to them. We need to design interventions with wider benefits in mind, so well-being benefits, health benefits, etc., equity. We need to implement multiple interventions, so social norm changes, pricing policies, redesigning cities, and we need to get the timing right. So we really need to use this opportunity as we come out of the pandemic to implement these changes, to lock in the emerging low carbon habits that we've seen people adopting. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorraine. I want to remind our viewers that you have a chance to ask a question to our guests. So you can use the comment box in Facebook. Just type down your question, or you can use also the phone number 26706361. Tātad, dāmas un kungi, ja jums ir jautājums kādam no mūsu viesiem, tad lūdzu izmantojiet vai no telefonu 26706361 vai arī vienkārši chatā rakstīt jautājumu. Here's Lorraine, one question from the viewer. What is the option? What is the opinion on nuclear energy as part of the solution in combating climate change, as well as the higher impact on the environment from other modes of power, both electricity and heat production, including renewables?
I will answer that question drawing on what I know about public opinion about nuclear in part, because we definitely need to decarbonize our energy supply. So we do need to have green sources of energy, including renewables and potentially nuclear. But we do know that in some countries, for example, the UK, attitudes to nuclear are generally not as positive. It's not as well supported as, for example, renewable energy. And there are various reasons for that, of course, partly to do with cost, but also safety concerns. So it will be much easier in some countries, particularly the UK, to get public support for renewable energy than for nuclear. But yeah, definitely in some places it's likely to form part of the energy mix to get to net zero.
Thank you very much. Once I was listening to your presentation, one word kept coming back to my mind. There's a great movie called Minimalist, where you can totally, the guys just tell their story about how to make life simple with lesser things surrounding you. So that also is some that can, maybe for somebody, it can help. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you very much for your presentation. Un, dāmas un kungi, mēs turpināsim mūsu zaļo meetupu. Šajā brīdī mēs turpināsim sarunas par klimata pārmaiņām, protams, arī par vidi. Un mums šajā brīdī ir pievienojies Eko Baltija grupa valdes priekšsēdētājs un organizācijas Not Hot dibinātājs Māris Simonovičs. Vai var pamēģināt vēlreiz? Tagad ir.
Yes, now we have it. Wonderful.
Ļoti labi. Bija tiešām interesanti dzirdēt iepriekšējos
runātājus. It was very interesting for me to listen to previous speakers.
Iedošu varbūt tādu bišķi
savu perspektīvu. If you don't mind, I'll try to add my 5 cents in terms of what we're doing at Eko Baltija and what is our vision on sustainability and how we understand it. And I think that sustainability and being green is the new normal that everyone should start getting used to, and it is not that difficult once you come to think. So I have 5 R's in my life that are very important in my personal life and in my company business life.
What do these 5 R mean? The most important is refuse. Whenever we make a decision on consumption, we have the chance to refuse unneeded things. Reduce, that's a very similar term, which denotes that you have the possibility to refuse and also reduce the consumption of objects, of things. And we know that the world in general is getting obese, and by reducing consumption, the world can get fitter. And another thing, which is the foundation for environmental policy, reuse, to use objects repeatedly to diminish new waste. We've heard already today that you can go shopping and take your own jars. You can go to non-packaged store. The next thing is repurpose. This is not met as frequently, and perhaps this term is not very popular currently in Latvia. But this means that a thing that has already served and can no longer used for its original function, it can be used for other purposes like glass packaging and to produce perhaps lamps. And then we come at recycle, which is the basis for Eco-Baltia business. We collect and sort and recycle packaging. So we return those things back into circulation.
Mazi. Tagad tūlīt pagam arī.
We seem to be having a technical problem with the sound. Well, just some examples. Here you can see the services that Eco-Baltia is offering to the clients, sorting of waste sorting, and also sorting of biological waste. It's discussed now in Europe, and it has just appeared in Latvia, and it's very important. In the context of climate and replacing also different energy resources with biogas. Packaging, we have been worked with packaging for years. But of course we know this problem of microplastics and the pollution of polymers pollution which we have in the environment. This can be decreased only if we all sort waste. And even if waste cannot be recycled, still they can be used to produce derived fuel. And of course, all those devices, electric and electronical, we know that technologies keep developing. And in this context, it's very important also to collect those used goods, electric and electronic, and the tires. The problem of tires is really growing each year. And Latvia is only starting to do something about it. But we see some positive trends in the development. We have now also established an production site for recycling tires, and then we can use all those materials to equip like football grounds and playgrounds for children. So these are just a couple of examples just to show you how we can give a second life to objects, to things, to send them back into economic circulation. What's ahead of us? It's clear that the European Union is thinking about circular economy and thinking about new methods for sorting waste and new also aims and objectives for sorting waste. So now textile, this is a very significant part of waste. And any person the speaker cannot be heard at the moment. So we know about those fashion trends and just replacing your wardrobe each year is one of the really very one of the most unfriendly types of consumption for environment, because you can wear some clothes for many years. You should not replace them annually. And definitely this will be introduced in Latvia, and this option will be accessible to everyone. Yeah, and the plastic waste that we collect is recycled. You see that waste is used as raw material. So it's really our own choice whether to just throw this into waste container or sort it for recycling. You should always ask this question. Whether our own individual actions are sustainable, do we overcome our laziness? Are we creating a better world for the coming generations? Another very important thing which we have to consider. We see waste and we see rubbish and we don't like it, but we don't see carbon emissions. But people should be aware of the footprints they are leaving. They should be able to calculate their emissions, their daily emissions, and every person actually should draft a plan, individual plan, how to compensate by planting trees. To decrease carbon emissions, it's not compromise. We have to really act in a very targeted, in a very purposeful way to decrease these emissions. Just because of our comfort and convenience, we should not sacrifice the future of the coming generations. We like to drive with diesel cars because diesel fuel is cheaper, but now we see that other environmental friendly technologies are developing in the context of transportation. And I can also tell about the Eco Baltia experience. Last year, we bought 5 cars using compressed natural gas, and it allowed us to save 24 tons per year. Of course, it's not cheap, and it was an experiment. Because at the time there was only one station where we could fuel up, but now we have been using these cars for 6 months, and I can say only the best about it. And in our investment program, we are including only cars of this type. So we are developing this trend. And also this network of fuel stations is expanding. We have more opportunities to fuel up with natural gas. And it's also important that also the government sees this as an opportunity to help environment, and the policy is aimed at supporting this. Well, in general, I would say we should not wait for just a group of environment enthusiasts to achieve positive change. Each of us, every one of us, should become involved and do at least something just to change our habits and customs. Only when millions of people become involved, we will be able to fight to combat this negative climate change and do something to allow the world to continue existing as it was. It's our individual responsibility to become involved and to involve also members of our families and be very responsible and really think about the footprints that we leave in nature. That was
Liels paldies, Māri.
all what I wanted to say. I will just remind our viewers that you can ask the questions to the speaker. You can write your questions in the comments part of the Facebook, and you can also send a message to the phone to 670-6361. Now we have a question. How much of the sorted waste is really recycled in Latvia? Out of the sorted waste, I believe that 90% are recycled. Well, 10 or up to 20% in some municipalities where they have started later with this waste sorting. So 10 or 20%, but everything that can be recycled is sent for recycling. So plastic, papers, cardboard, all this is being recycled. Yes, what we can recycle, it's polymers, Eco Baltija.
Jā. Mums ir ik pa laikam, diemžēl, mēs tevi tādos pusvārdos dzirdam. Pusvārdos tas vēl būtu tā kā maigi teiks, laikam pusteikumos.
We just hear just half of your sentences or half of your words. Perhaps we could provide the following solution. Perhaps we can, we will get in touch with you directly, and then perhaps you can also write some answers to the questions in the comments. But I thank you, Māris, for your presentation and for the work that Eco Baltija is doing in Latvia. So Māris Simonovic, chairman of the board of Eco Baltija Group and founder of Group. We move on, and now we will have our next speaker connecting up to our Think Green, the founder of the first package-free store in Latvia, Burka Marija Sološenko. Hi, Maria. I feel very honored that you invited me to participate in this event, and all the previous presentations were very interesting for me. We are ready also to listen to you and your presentation. Can you see my presentation?
That's good. So today my task is to talk to you about, my name is, by the way, Marija Sološenko, and I'm the sustainable lifestyle enthusiast and founder of the package-free shop Jar. So I'll talk about what I feel, what I think, and how I found my calling to you today. So, a bit about me. So one of my main roles right now is being a mother. I'm a mother to a wonderful 3-year-old girl who's very curious, very nosy, and has surprising comments. Quite often I'm a daughter to my parents, and my mother has always been very thoughtful about how we spend the money, and I remember my childhood, and we had this notebook where we also put in all of our cash figures, and that is how we planned our shopping, and that made me very foresightful. And my father never threw anything away. He said, we might make use of it one day, and he's still washing, by the way, those plastic bags. I'm bilingual. My mother is Latvian and my father is Russian, and at times I don't even know in which language I'm thinking. I switch from Russian to Latvian all the time, and it's my blessing really. And I love languages, and I've learned quite many languages in my life: English, German, Italian, Spanish, and French. And I believe that the more languages you know, the more interesting your life will be, the more exciting the living will be for you. You only learn how to communicate by learning language. You also find out a lot about the country whose language you try to learn, their culture, how their people think, and you start to understand or feel people on a different level. And I love traveling, and I'm again lucky to have traveled to many places in the world, and one of the most favorite trips has been to India, China, UAE, and I was very much impressed by these countries and learned a lot from them. And I am a person who loves to make calculated decisions, and I have to see the figures in order to understand something and form my opinion of something, in order to have some sort of an objective valuation instead of just expressing my feelings about something. So how do I feel right now? My teen years were very difficult. I was looking for meaning of life, and I wanted to understand why we are here, and I was very much depressed by that. And I've gone to a couple of universities. I have an MBA in tourism, and I've got a master's degree in finance and financial analytics, and I've worked for a number of employers, starting from being a secretary, office manager, marketing manager, and project coordinator, and my most recent job was State Audit Office. When I applied for State Audit Office, some of my friends said, "Murray, you're a very active person. You need a very sort of active job, public administration. I don't think with all the bureaucracy it's very suitable for you." But it's not the case with the State Audit Office. It's a wonderful employer, and I've had the honor to work for the State Audit Office. Unfortunately, it was incompatible with my current working life, and I had to leave it. But I very much like State Audit Office being very much future-oriented. So a turning point in my life, what changed my life, of course, a baby, my baby daughter. And that's when I was a stay-at-home mom, and I had to order food online. They delivered 4 bags to me, and as I was putting the various items into my jars, I realized that I'll have a whole pile of packaging, of waste at the end of the day, and I remembered what I had seen previously, and I started thinking to myself, how much waste do I generate by just shopping online? Once, and I have had the opportunity to spend a month in the wonderful country of India, and I've learned a great deal about their culture and their history. But what I also realize is that they have a huge waste problem. There's waste on the side of the road, there's rubbish there, there's cows, dogs, children in all of this rubbish, and I was very much shocked by what I saw, and just to keep breathing, I had to use my scarf and put it over my mouth, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to breathe. You would have this gagging reflex because of all the smell. I was happy to come back to Latvia, because we often forget how green and clean our country in fact is. And that made me realize that the increasing waste that we are generating is a big problem. It is the problem that we transfer to our children who are not responsible for it, and it pollutes climate, air, soil, water. it negatively impacts ecosystems and species and our health as well, and health of our children. So I started browsing the internet looking for possible solutions and making my life more environmentally friendly and sustainable. And I found the zero waste movement online sort of waste movement. If we look at its background, emerged in the 1960s, and its motto is living without waste. So you are meant to rethink your everyday behavior and use waste as a recyclable material, and this philosophy is based on reducing and refusing, reusing, recycling and recomposting. But I will not elaborate on 5 R's because the speaker before me already spoke quite eloquently of these 5 R's, and I started following these 5 R's in my everyday life, because you could already buy a lot of products without any packaging on the market, in spice shops and so on and so forth. But with a child, with an infant on my hands, it was difficult to do, and by traveling you're also leaving a footprint. So that's how I came up with an idea of bringing these products one place and creating a packaging-free shop that we decided to call JAR. This is our team back in 2018. As regards to the range of products that we are selling, it is quite diverse. I should say it's become quite diverse in fact lately. We have nuts, sweets, food mixes, environmentally friendly hygiene and other products, everyday products. So why do our clients choose packaging-free products? Because they care about the environment and want to reduce the waste that they're leaving after themselves, and it is also cheaper because you don't have to pay for the packaging, which may be about 30% of the product price. You can buy as much as you actually need to prepare a particular food. We have also realized that we should do more with what we have created, and we have come up with a number of other side initiatives to the shop. For example, the jar exchange shelf. I know that there are people who have a lot of these empty glass jars in their home that they don't want to throw away and would like to be reused, and there are people who are making jams and who would, be happy to get them for free instead of buying those jars. We have created the jar exchange, people bringing in jars and taking them away, and we have quite a lot of jars, and we appreciate very much clearing those shelves. We have also the Museum of Happiness in Latgali in eastern Latvia. It's a new museum which shows you how to multiply your sense of happiness in easy ways, and one way is to break dishes. At one point they ran out of dishes to break, and we reached out to our followers and asked them to donate their dishes that this Museum of Happiness could use, and they initially brought dishes with defects, plates, cups, but then they started bringing in new dishes that they received as gifts, but they had no use for at their home, and these good dishes are necessary for students. They need them, and we have also found hidden treasures in those boxes, like Kuznetsov porcelain factory tea set that you can also either use yourself or then probably give to somebody else. And then you have candles after birthday parties and other parties, and you don't have to throw them away. They can be also used, melted, to make new candles. So we have candle waste initiative, but I will not go into that because I've already run out of time, and let me just sum up what I said about quest for meaning of life. As I was changing my behavior, at one point I realized that I have finally found my purpose and meaning in life. I would like to live my life in a way that makes this world a bit better. So that's the main idea. As regards to the future, we would like to expand our online platform. So I will audit the efficiency of our internal processes. A lot of automation will happen. We are going to also expand our business and promote other green initiatives as well. And I've thought about selling franchise on my shop as well. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, we do have questions. We'd like to once again remind you to post your question in the comment box.
Es pieļauju, kāds arī skatījās un domāja, nē, nu Marijai viss tik skaisti rožaini un tā, tad nu kur tad vēl vairāk, ja? Bet rekur jautājums, vai kāds no ģimenes locekļiem ir izrādījis pretestību pret beziepakojuma un zaļo dzīvesveidu vispār, un vai ir izdevies viņus pārliecināt? Varbūt arī ieteikumu, kā labāk pārliecināt.
Any tips and hints as to how to do that probably best? Yes, initially when I came up with sustainable lifestyle idea, everyone was very skeptical. He said they said nobody needs that, and you will lose a lot of money with packaging-free shop, and it's just too left field. But now these skeptics are starting to realize that these environmental factors are very important. They are bringing you jars. Yes, they're bringing me jars, and they are separating their waste, sorting their waste. They're using reusable items instead of disposable items. And I think that our example has inspired people and is a good example that you can also change your behavior. I think that, leading by example is very convincing. Yes, I have to agree with you. One more question to you. What about waste? And how does waste somehow, relate to climate change? Well, I'm not a scientist. I'm really not a scientist. I can't give you a scientific or evidence-based answer to this. And I've studied this myself. We learned about GHG emissions and gases at school, but I can't really give you an answer that I can be confident about. So I would like to thank Marija Salashenko once again, the first owner of packaging-free shop in Latvia. Jar is the name of her shop, so good luck in your future undertakings and all the success in future to you. And thank you for joining our Green Meetup. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone watching us online, we'll have a 5-minute break now. We'll break for 5 minutes and then we'll continue with step 2, or the second session, which is a panel discussion on climate neutrality. Climate change, of course, is the key topic today. We'll have some experiences from UK and Latvia, so see you in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Esiet sveicināti
Welcome at the first Green Meetup in Latvia destination COP26 organized by the British Embassy in Latvia. I am Kristaps Stābergs, and we continue with the second session. We just had a break just to move around, perhaps to prepare a delicious drink, because we are now going to have a very exciting panel discussion, and you have links available to you, and you can listen to our discussion in English, Latvian or Russian. So choose the language that you want to follow the panel discussion in. We have foreign participants, that's why we are going to conduct this panel discussion in English. So if you need interpretation into Latvian or Russian, you can switch to it.
COP26, which is called Speak Green. It is not only about speaking, but of course about the real actions. The UK and Latvia has the target to reach climate neutrality by 2050. How far are the countries with their targets, what has been done and how to succeed. Answers will be given by our invited experts, and I welcome the head of Fissile Energy and Waste Management Work Group, Dace Cirule. Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
We welcome also Head of EU Climate Policy, representing Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, James Eriksson. We welcome James. He is with us, yes. Yes, he's been added to our lovely conversation. James, we see you. And just in a moment, we'll probably gonna hear you as well. This is the new reality that we all have to face, like a common, nice chat, each from spots that we are from and the locations. Technicians are doing all the best. And do we hear James? James, do you hear us? All right, we see you. James, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, please.
Apologies.
Yes.
Hopefully you can hear me. Very sorry about that.
It is okay. That's fine. No worries. And we'll continue to introduce our guests. So we have Rafael Valette, Manager of Sustainable Finance, Green Investment Group. Yes.
Hi.
Hey, lovely.
To be here.
Lovely to hear you, see you, wonderful. And last but not least, Chairman of the Board of the Association Zaļā Brīvība, Jānis Brizga. Jānis with us, the last one in our panel group discussion. Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Wonderful.
Hello, everyone.
Great to see you guys, and so I also want to invite you all, our panel members, to ask questions if you have, or comment on each other topics or each other comments. So feel free to pitch in your thoughts on different topics that we're going to address right now. So the UK has a multiple activities ongoing to achieve climate neutrality. The climate law is one of them. I want to ask James, how is the climate law working? And what are the other policy tools that are applied by the UK towards climate neutrality?
Thank you. For my slot, I'm going to use some slides, if that works for everyone else.
Sure.
So just bear with me. I will bring the slides up in a moment.
Yes, it's working.
So I'm hoping that
switch to full screen. Yeah, it's all good.
Fantastic. Thank you. So in my slot today, I just want to talk a little bit about the Climate Change Act itself, the progress that we've sort of made, 13 years on from its introduction, talk about some of the challenges that lie ahead, and conclude with some kind of reflections, which I hope will kind of be useful for other countries, including Latvia, in terms of kind of more generalizable things about what's worked and perhaps where the challenges are. So the first thing is the UK's Climate Change Act. This is really just to describe the core elements of it. Essentially, it's kind of quite simple in the sense that the UK's kind of Climate Act, introduced in 2008, the key core component of it at the time, it set an 80% reduction by 2050. So it set a very clear long-term goal for emission reduction. And kind of within that, it set a clear pathway by setting budgets that progressively got tighter up to that sort of 2050 kind of goal. So these sort of 5-year periods called carbon budgets. And as you can see in the bottom left, those bars get lower and lower. So essentially it sets the long-term target, but also sets a pathway, which essentially is a glide path down to that long-term target. So it sets really good both clarity on the long-term objective, but also near-term kind of reductions that are needed to get there. There's also a toolkit and a monitoring framework. So alongside setting up these emissions reduction targets, the Act created the Climate Change Committee, which is an independent body from the UK government, which advises the UK government on both how to hit the targets, but also every year produces a progress report to assess how well the UK is or isn't doing in terms of meeting the targets. Those 5-year carbon budgets, as I've mentioned, are set at least 12 years in advance to give kind of clarity on kind of what the emission reduction targets will be. We're just currently in the process of setting the 6th carbon budget here in the UK. The quick thing I'll mention is in terms of the critical sort of background to the Climate Change Act was really the Stern report in 2006, which really reframed climate not just as essentially as an economic and not just really a moral issue. And the real, I think, advantage of the Climate Change Act in the UK is it kind of, to some extent, helped depoliticise climate. So essentially, it was less of a question of just not whether to act, but more exactly how you act. So it sort of moved the debate on in the UK. In terms of kind of progress, so 13 years on from the introduction of the Act, in the UK, we've had a kind of really positive sort of story to tell in terms of decoupling growth and emissions. So as it says, and you can see in the chart on the left-hand side, between that 1990 period, which is the baseline for the UK, and 2019, emissions reduced by 44%, whilst the UK economy grew by 78%. So that's a really positive and kind of strong achievement and story. Looking on the right-hand side, you can see that actually a lot, and in fact the majority of this progress was came from emissions in the power sector, so reductions in the power sector. And there was a very rapid transition in the UK away particularly from coal power and a shift towards actually gas power. So today it's only 1.6% of actually the UK's electricity mix. And just 5 years ago it was 25%. So it's a very, very rapid shift away from coal in the UK. That can be credited really to, in the context of the UK, having a very kind of stable carbon price. So the UK introduced a carbon price floor alongside being a participant in the EU ETS. So that provided, if you like, a clear price on carbon, which facilitated the shift from essentially put a more price on dirty forms of pollution such as coal and sort of hastened that shift to gas. And alongside that, the UK has been one of the sort of pioneers and sort of pushing forward the development of offshore wind. So we introduced a sort of framework to if you like, commission offshore renewable energy, and that framework has driven down costs extremely quickly. So we started out at about £140 per megawatt hour, and we're now down to about £40 per megawatt hour. And so that, if you like, system of auctions has been really successful in making wind power much cheaper in the UK. So that's facilitated the decarbonisation of the UK power system. So the big picture for the UK is very positive so far, but as this quote from the Chris Stark, who's the chief executive of the UK Climate Change Committee, sort of points out, it's served us very well so far, but particularly as we go forward and when we think about net zero emissions, it's going to be tested in a way that hasn't really been tested so far. And I just mentioned, I'm not going to go through any of these in detail, but just as an example, in the UK, we have currently gas boilers in most homes and buildings. And to decarbonise heating, for example, in buildings, we've currently got about 4.5% of low carbon, 4.5% proportion of sort of homes heated by low carbon options. And we need to boost that to about 80 to 90%, depending on which scenario you go with for net zero. So there are huge challenges across different sectors of the economy in the UK to hit that net zero target. So I mentioned net zero. So in June 2019, the UK was the first major economy to set a net zero target in law. So the original Climate Change Act was amended to make the target more stringent, the net zero emissions. And more recently, the UK came forward with a more ambitious 2030 climate target, which is an at least 68% reduction on 1990 levels by 2030. So that's a very ambitious, ratcheting up of kind of near-term ambition as well. The government also outlined a 10-point plan to help kind of hit that target, which included 12 billion of government investment. And there is in the UK a slew of sort of strategies coming forward on different sectors to decarbonise different sectors of the economy. And we do have, by the end of the year, our Treasury departments producing a sort of review on how to hit net zero emissions, looking at the costs and how to do it. So there's a lot going on domestically. So I just want to really conclude by some final kind of reflections on kind of the UK's experience with the Climate Change Act. So I think in the UK, political support has really been fundamental to the foundation of the UK's kind of framework, and the clear goal and accountability and short-term targets has been really core components, and they've worked well so far. The key issue is we now need to broaden the progress we've made to other sectors outside the power sector, and really for each country, the challenges and opportunities for the different sectors will kind of course vary. I think the take-home message, I think, on the Climate Change Act is really it's a very important and necessary part of the UK's decarbonisation sort of efforts, but definitely not sufficient in and of itself. So really you need a clear comprehensive policy framework needed to drive decarbonisation. So those kind of strategies I mentioned forthcoming in the UK, looking at how you decarbonise particular areas, are really critical. In the UK, I think, and increasingly elsewhere, as you talk about net zero emissions and the changes that need to happen, you need really high political level support to make that happen. So in the UK, we now have a climate change committee, which meets at cabinet level to sort of discuss and drive forward climate action. And I think the key point as well is that you cannot really just have climate action driven by the Environment Ministry. So in the UK, I mentioned the HMT, our Treasury net zero cost review, but I think increasingly it's got to be a whole of government effort with finance ministries sort of front and centre of the effort. In the UK, kind of continued public pressure has been really important. And I think the CCC itself has been very effective and carries a lot of weight because it has a lot of expertise. So I think really adequately resourcing that independent body has been crucial. The final thing I'll mention is, so I think hopefully those reflections are useful. There are some other tools out there that sort of the UK gets involved in to help others develop their own sorts of long-term strategies, including the 2050 calculator, and there's a 2050 pathways platform. But I think I will stop there to leave time for other colleagues to come in.
Thank you very much, James. Just a short question to you. Would you say that would the UK reach those goals that you shared without the climate law?
I don't think that would. I think it's so. As I said, I think in the last slide, I don't think that the UK would have hit the targets. We wouldn't be in the position we're in today without the Climate Change Act. And really, I think the reason for that is it sets a really clear. So it's not just about setting clarity for what the government's trying to achieve, but it sends really clear signals to investors and others in the external world. So that shift from coal to gas, and now we're getting huge investment in low carbon energy in the UK. That Climate Change Act and the framework it set out has sent those kind of signals to the market, which are really important to driving that decarbonisation. So, as I say, I think it's absolutely fundamental, necessary, but in and of itself, it's also not enough. You need the more detailed strategies to actually deliver on the detail as well.
Right. Thank you very much. I want to remind our viewers that there's a chance for you to ask a question to our panel members. So use the chat box in the Facebook down below on the comments. Just use it to ask a question, or use the telephone number 26706361. That's 26706361. Just type your question, and also just type it in to whom should this question be referred to. I want to involve Jānis about we heard about the climate law in UK, and we want to talk about the climate law here in Latvia. How's the work done to have that, and what are the climate priorities in Latvia, and what are the relevant policy tools to comply with? Is the practice similar to the UK? So please, Jānis.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I also have prepared a few slides. I will switch to slides now. Do you see them?
Yes. hit that button for full screen and we're ready to go. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, in Green Liberty, we've been working with climate policy for quite some time and been following the developments also of the climate law now under construction, if we can say so. But I will start with maybe briefly describing where we are and then giving some ideas of where we should be going. Latvia recently has joined the kind of club of the most ambitious European member states pushing for higher climate targets, and that's been announced last year in the Sibiu's declaration. Also, Latvia joining this. I think the main argument, also what the Prime Minister has said, is that Latvia is fully dependent on fossil fuels from other countries. So decreasing this dependency and going to more renewables, more energy efficiency is just a rational kind of economic choice. Also, similarly to what we heard before from UK, this has become the economic question. It's not just a moral question or the ecological or environmental question. It's very much economic discussion of losers and winners, and I think we can also clearly see this this here in Latvia. If we look at some of the numbers, how the emissions have changed in Latvia, some of the elements which I want to stress here in this picture is 1995. We already experienced climate neutrality. Industrial emissions after the collapse of Soviet Union significantly decreased. Our forests worked as a significant carbon sink, absorbing the CO2 emissions. In Latvia, half of the territory is covered by forests, so it's a very important resource. But of course, that's in the 90s. It was not a planned action. It was just an accident or the result of the collapsed economic activity, and also was linked very much to the a lot of social problems and increasing inequality and poverty and so on. So we don't want to repeat this kind of scenario. So that's why I think that's why it's very important that we are planning now very much ahead and looking for possibilities how we can actually benefit from moving to this climate neutrality in 2050. So if you look at the business as usual scenario, our emissions are keep increasing until 2030 and then slightly decreasing. So we have to significantly change our approach, how we deal with the economic activities. Maybe also some more differences from other countries. Latvia's energy sector is rather green if we compare to other countries. We are not coal dependent like our neighbor, for example, in north in Estonia or some other European countries. The power is produced very much from hydro. Of course, we don't really have developed renewable energy sectors which are wind or solar, but the old traditional hydropower is still there and producing. We are also using a lot of biomass for heating. So energy sector is not the main emission source. But some of the challenging sectors are transport, for example, which if we compare to the last decades, we haven't really managed to decrease the transport-related emissions. Private cars are more than half of the CO2 emissions in the transport sector, and people are more and more switching to the private cars from the public transportation, which of course don't really help. So there is a significant changes needed in the transportation sector, and it's not just the technical changes. We are not expecting that some new buses will solve this problem. It's also a lot of social, psychological questions, which are about the status symbol of the car in society and so, which have to be changed. Another problematic sector is agriculture, where emissions are also stable and not really decreasing, as well as land use change. And in the 90s until 2005, the land use change, we had a kind of positive effect on climate change because our land worked as a carbon sink. But now that's been changing, and we are seeing land use change emissions. And this of course is a negative trend, because then we don't have this buffer on how we can actually decrease the emissions. So some of these sectors are rather challenging to decrease the emissions, and we need fast and clear action here. So on a way forward, I think there is it should be clear that there is no room for new fossil fuel related infrastructure, gas pipelines, gas or oil terminals, also waste incineration plants, which are dependent on plastic incineration. All these, if we are building such infrastructure now, that will be stranded assets, because in a longer term, we will have to get away from this kind of infrastructure if we want to reach 2050 climate neutrality. We also have to start thinking how we can actually reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, both in energy sector from natural gas, how we can move away from natural gas, and also how we can move away in the transport sector from the fossil fuels. And this is also rather clear that government is will not be able to buy the electric cars for all the people, or subsidize this. People will not have budget because electric cars are also more expensive. Now we are dependent on 10 years old cars from the Western Europe. So there is a real need for changes in how we look at the transportation and mobility, and I think we have to start thinking and discussing these future trends in transportation right now. Also, renewable energies have attracted a lot of criticism, both from nature conservation organizations in terms of, for example, wind energy and biomass use. So we need also clear discussion here on how we support and what is real sustainable renewable energy sources. And one more point, which I think is very important. There is a need for clear public engagement and involvement in climate policy design, and not to design the policy which actually pushes people in a corner, if you can say so. For example, the French example with the yellow vest, when government was designing new policies to decrease the transportation emissions, but didn't really provide kind of a way for people to switch to something more sustainable, something more climate friendly. And I think in Latvia it's even more important because of the income and also climate inequality in society. So we cannot afford to have climate change policy which increases inequality. And that's why public engagement, I think, is very important throughout the design of these kind of policies. We are now planning to work together with Manabals, My Voice, that's a kind of online platform for public engagement, to design the climate, to get more people involved in designing of the climate law, as well as other climate policies. And I hope that will change. Government is also now designing the new recovery and resiliency plan for Latvia, which actually was rather a poor example of public engagement. It's not just NGOs or civil society complaining, it's also trade unions and businesses who are not involved. So I think we cannot really afford that kind of approach to climate policy, and we need more public involvement. Yeah, just to end, we have seen several times in our this short Latvia's history since the independence on how we can decrease the emissions. And I think, yeah, we have to look forward and really plan ahead for the future climate policies and deal with energy poverty and income inequalities parallel to the climate issues. I think these different policy streams are possible to be combined and to join together. Thank you. That's from my side.
Thank you, Yanis. Thank you very much. And I want to remind our viewers that you have a chance to ask a question to either of our experts. I want to ask James. You just heard the presentation from Yanis, and he pointed out the things that are happening here in Latvia, going to our target to be neutral. What are the similar challenges that you see in UK and also in Latvia?
Yeah, thank you. Some of the themes that were highlighted, I think, are really consistent actually across countries. So the two points I think that were mentioned were kind of the importance of engaging the public, which I think is a really, really important issue. And the other one was, I think, sort of keeping an eye on tackling inequalities and making sure that the low carbon transition essentially does not result in too many sharp edges for too many people. Those two issues are hugely important. I think on the first, engaging the public, in the UK we have had a citizens' assembly on climate. Ireland has done something similar. France has as well. So they, I think, have been proved as quite effective vehicles to get kind of some engagement. But I think particularly as we go forward towards kind of the more challenging areas of decarbonisation, so low carbon heating, replacing boilers, all those sorts of things, I think the challenge of engaging with the public and bringing them along on why changes are needed and bringing them into it is really, really critical. I think on the other issue that was sort of highlighted in terms of addressing sort of inequalities and also really having an eye on how you manage the transition, given it involves transitions for essentially all areas of your economy, you're going to net zero, I think is absolutely critical. So in the UK and the CCC, our kind of independent body, essentially commissioned or recommended the Treasury commission a review on the cost of net zero, precisely to address some of what you call the distributional impact, the impacts on different parts of society from the transition. So I think increasingly finance ministries are going to have to grip the issue of how you, for example, in the UK, replacing individual boilers with low carbon heating is very expensive, but you also get savings from the shift from combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. So there are really questions about how you step back and look in the round of the transition and whether savings in some areas can help offset some of the costs in other areas. So these are some of the issues that our net zero review in the UK is kind of looking at. So as I say, later in the year, there'll be a more detailed sort of report coming from our Treasury. So I think that the fact that this sort of transition needs to be gripped by Treasury and really proactively address any of the winners and losers side of things, I think is really critical. Thanks.
Thank you, James, for your input. And I think, to be environmentally friendly, sometimes it takes time, it takes energy, it takes bad habits to go away, and sometimes, on occasions, it also takes some money. It costs something actually to make a change, and we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about finances, and I want to involve a manager of sustainable finance, Green Investment Group, Rafael Valet, to talk about financing sustainable projects, and which is quite popular in UK, but has not been widely known in Latvia yet. So please share your thoughts on what does sustainable financing mean, and what is the history and the trends, please.
Yes, thank you. I think it's fair to say, and it was great to hear from Yanis and James, that this transition is going to require huge amounts of money and investments. Some estimates say as much as $90 trillion by 2030. And much of that money can't come from the public sector. It will have to come from investors in all of their shapes and sizes, including pension funds, asset managers, investment banks, traders, capital markets, and even retail banking, where you and I have bank accounts and where we might borrow money. So really sustainable finance, to me anyway, is both greening the financial services sector, so ensuring the whole of the finance sector globally rethinks the way it approaches governance and disclosure and standards and even accountancy to some extent, to make sure that we embed climate into our decision making day to day, no matter what we invest in, but also that we start channeling much more money than we have historically into sustainable infrastructure. And that goes from infrastructure whose purpose isn't necessarily to be sustainable. Things like hospitals and schools and our homes will need to be aligned with net zero, and we'll need to be financing that, both retrofitting existing infrastructure and building new infrastructure. Also large-scale infrastructure like energy, but also quite small-scale stuff as well, like retrofitting homes and heating, which is in general actually fairly small sums of money, but that need to be replicated millions of times, quite literally. So really for me, financing sustainable infrastructure and technology is thinking about climate risk is a really important element of that. So being better at understanding if an asset that we're building or we're investing in is at risk of climate and how we can reduce that risk, understanding what that risk look like. So depending on the country, it could be flood and storm, or it could be heat wave and drought, or both. Or it can be sea level rise, so making sure we understand these risks much better than we have so far. And that's going to take better collaboration, I think, with academia, universities, people who are involved in climate modeling, so that this knowledge transfers better into the finance sector. It's also taking ESG metrics and making those central to the decision-making process in investment. And when I say ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues. And both James and Yanis have touched on them. On social elements, it's thinking about, are we creating more green jobs? And are we avoiding people losing jobs, especially when we think about fossil fuel infrastructure? So rather than, for example, decommissioning an oil rig, can we transition it into a hydrogen plant instead and keep these jobs and repurpose them into different jobs? Also promoting better access to social services for everybody. On the environmental side, it's considering things like climate impacts. So carbon emissions is the easy one, and is the one that everybody is talking about. But we also increasingly need to start thinking about our impacts on biodiversity, on pollution, air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and on waste as well. Are we trying to avoid getting more waste into landfill and also continuing that pollution cycle? And then on governance, I think that's probably a theme that we've gotten much better at in the last few years, but increasingly making sure we're transparent and lawful, and that we disclose the activities that we do, and that we better disclose all of these climate metrics that I'm talking about. And this is the work that we're doing in Green Investment Group. So all of these ESG elements we embed in the way that we assess the investments that we make. And if they don't meet all of these objectives, or if they negatively impact these objectives, then we don't pursue that investment at all, and we'll just finish the deal without doing it, which I think is quite important. So I guess building on that and on what Yanis and James have said, where we've gone so far, or where we are at today, I think we're seeing really great progress from the financial sector in following what a lot of countries have been doing, especially last year and this year ahead of COP26, in making net zero commitments, which is brilliant. But I think at the moment it's very much the leaders of the pack are going ahead of these conversations, and we need all the laggards and the financial institutions who don't think about it to bring them into that conversation as well. And I think to some extent it's going to take more regulation, and not necessarily individual countries making up their own regulations, but trying as much as possible having a global or international standards for greening the financial sector and thinking about what net zero actually means. You know, if I compare it, for example, with accounting, we've had accountants for hundreds of years. And if we employed a Chinese accountant or an American accountant or a British accountant, we would probably end up with pretty much the same product. We have the same way around the world of thinking about balance sheets and cash flows. And ideally, we need to get to the same point on how we do net zero accounting. So how do we measure carbon emissions and nature impacts, like I was talking about? We really need to get to that point. So I think at this stage, the financial services sector is looking at governments to help guide us a little bit in these decisions and on what standards and methodologies need to be used. And COP26 is a really helpful platform for having these conversations.
Thank you. In UK, you have multiple business investment tools in the UK. So which sectors of the area use them the most?
I think from my perspective, it's probably energy. And we've seen that in James's presentation, actually, like this is the sector that we've been the best at decarbonizing. It's been relatively simple, and the policy frameworks have been very stable over decades. So the CFD system has been there for a really long time. So there's a lot of certainty for the financial services, and we know exactly how to manage risk and how to think about opportunities. We know how to model the revenues and do all the financial modeling. So that's really the sector that we've done the best, even though there are some new technologies emerging, especially hydrogen, carbon capture and storage around energy that we are still just in the very early phases of, and we're working really closely with government to make sure the right regulations and policy support mechanisms are in place. The next sectors that we'll need to tackle is definitely transport and also housing industry. This is, we're all getting there, but I think we need to follow the really great examples that we've had in energy over the last 2 decades.
Thank you very much. Once again, viewers, guys, thank you for your questions. We will address them just in a second. Don't worry, we have them, and we will address to our experts. I want to involve Dace into our conversation because we are talking about finances. And so, Dace, could you share what are the sustainable financing trends in Latvia?
Thank you for giving me a possibility to join this nice conversation, and I really appreciate all the comments and presentations made by my previous 3 colleagues, and I really appreciate all of the things you mentioned, and I can only sign up under them and say that I fully support them and I fully share your opinion. What I wanted to add here is that if we speak about the sustainable financing in Latvia, there are 2 things which we have to take into consideration. So one thing is that whether we have some sustainable financing instruments available on the market, namely whether government or banks or funds or some other institutions are providing financing for these purposes. And another thing, which is equally important, is the ability of our society and of our business to take these financial instruments, to apply for them, and to provide that they are compliant, that they will take these resources, they will use them for the purpose, and they will be able to return them when time comes. So if we speak about the first part of all of these issues, I would say that our government has made some very small progress on this. I cannot say that we haven't done anything, but at the same time, I would openly say and honestly say that much more could have been done, but so far. What we see here is that there are some financing programs available for those who want to improve energy efficiency of their houses. There are some financing programs available to companies which want to improve their energy efficiency of their production lines or production process and so far. There are a couple of commercial banks which are very active in the, and especially over the last year, they have become very, very active in this field of green financing. They are looking for possibilities how to finance, for instance, change of the cars owned by some companies, how to finance some other improvements in the companies, which would lead to more energy efficiency, to the reduction of carbon emissions, to the improvement of some other processes, so that we were compliant and made less impact on the environment. They're really active in thinking of potential financial instruments and trying to put them on the market. But what they face is the reality of our businesses and of our individuals actually to take these financial instruments. And if you look at the at the statistical data, which were published actually just a couple of days ago, so they're very up to date. At least 1/2 of each inhabitant here in Latvia has some loan from credit institution or from some fund or some other institution. If you look at this portfolio of all credits, then the total sum of them is approximately 13,000 million. And total debt is 1.4 billion euros at the moment. So this is the sum which our individuals are currently owing. By this I mean they are not paying in time. They're owing it to the banks or to some other institutions where they have borrowed. If we look at those who are in debt, in most cases, these are economically active people, aged from 30 years up to 50 years. So most probably they have some work, most probably they have some family, and they have some house to take care for, and they have most probably children to take care for. So at least 35% of all of the borrowers are currently ranked officially with the two lowest credit rating rates available here in Latvia. So it's either Class A or Class D. And in practice, it means that in case any financial institution gave any money to them, they would immediately know that there is a very little chance to get this money back. And only 29% out of all of these borrowers are ranked with the Class A, which means that financial institutions would be willing to give financing to them and would feel themselves quite comfortable that this money will be returned. And there is another statistic. Another statistic is that approximately half of all inhabitants here in Latvia are in practice doing something else in addition to their normal regular work to get some additional income for their household or for their family. And the other half has openly responded that most probably they would be willing to get some additional financing for their or some additional income, but they haven't done anything actually to take the initiative to make this first step, to take the responsibility for their family income and to go forward and to attract some additional income. So the reason why I was actually going through these statistics and giving all of this information was simply to show you what is the status currently we are living in, and that we can think of as many financial instruments as we want to. But what we first have to make sure is that there are companies, on average, at the sufficient number, which can actually borrow this money, and there are individuals which are actually able to borrow this money. So also, this statistic very clearly demonstrates the problem which we have here in Latvia is that we have very tiny level of middle class. And if we had a very large one, if middle class was something which most of us here in Latvia could associate ourselves with, then this would be a completely different picture. But in our case, middle class is so tiny that it simply cannot actually serve as the pillow which is necessary actually to go forward with these financial instruments, with these goals, and with these transformations we are actually facing at the moment. So here, I would say that I completely agree with Jānis in saying that what we have to reformulate what good life is. But at the same time, we have to make sure that even if we reformulate what the good life is, that at least most of us can afford it. And at that moment where we can afford good life, when it is redefined, we have quite a substantive mass of businesses and individuals being able to borrow money, to invest, to go forward, to improve their situation, and so on. So that would be my comment so far, and I would appreciate if you had some additional comments to make.
Yes, we have multiple questions and also several for you, Dace. One of them, you mentioned, of course, the financial challenges here in Latvia, economical challenges. I want to talk about, what's that, like carrots and sticks, yes? So what does motivate businesses or maybe regular people to become more climate friendly? What would motivate them more? Is it a carrot or a stick?
Well, if we stay at this level of conversation, I would rather say that it is carrot than stick, of course. But there is one, at least one other aspect which I would like to highlight here. Our society, and we have historical reasons why it has developed, but our society is, in general, very reluctant to take any initiatives. So, and one of the things which I have read in some books of anthropology is that Latvians are actually considered those who simply since birth, we are somehow underestimating ourselves, and we ourselves do not feel that we are something which is worth taking the action. So we would rather sit and wait that someone else does. We would rather sit and wait when someone comes and says that we have to do something. But at the moment when someone has come and has said that we have to take the action, at that moment we would choose rather to follow the carrot, not the stick.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from the audience and viewers to Dace. Is Latvia collaborating or learning from other countries? For example, Singapore, where several ministries were working together creating the Green Plan.
Mm-hmm. I wish we did. And what I can say is that all of these issues which relate to the climate neutrality, which relate to the climate in general, they all require harmonized and simultaneous work of several ministries. I have seen over the last 2 or 3 years that this coordination and communication between the ministries, it is improving, but it is not yet at a sufficient level so that we could say there is one ministry leading or giving instructions to other, everyone else follows, and that the work goes on in a very harmonious way. So I would say that we have very, very much to do in this aspect, so that the government started to coordinate among themselves more efficiently and more timely.
Thank you. I would like to ask if any of the experts, our panel members, have anything to add on to what has heard. What did you hear from Dace? I'll give you yes, Rafael, please.
Thank you. I think that's you put your finger on something really important, and it goes way beyond just Latvia in terms of making sure that the green measures that we put in don't leave people worse off, and that we can transcend people's financial abilities, because in a lot of cases, the people who live in fuel poverty, for example, can't afford to pay for their heating bills. So there's no way we can incentivize them whether with carrot or stick to implement huge retrofit changes in their homes, like completely changing insulation or heating. And the finance sector is working really hard to rethink completely how we finance some of these measures. So I'll just use one example of something we've started to think about in the UK, and I think it's happening in the rest of the EU as well, where if we did a loan, for example, to improve a home and to start allowing a household to save on their energy bills by making the house better insulated, the loan stays with the house. So whoever lives in that house and owns that house will repay the loan for say 10 years. But it does mean that if you did want to move out of this house, you don't take with you a loan that you don't benefit from anymore, and you can whoever lives in the house then can pay back that loan with the savings that they make on their energy bills. So it doesn't impact your day-to-day financial situation as a household. And I think we need to start thinking much more creatively about all of these financial mechanisms. And it's quite hard, because we've used the mortgage system and the lending systems for many decades, and we now need to rethink entirely how we do this. And I think, to the point about collaboration, is the same challenge for financial services as well. And I think I've just started to see that in people in my jobs, for example, across different banks, we're now starting to talk to each other about how we use these different models, and how we go to net zero, and how we're facing different challenges. And we're really starting to share some of that knowledge, when before, because of competitive tensions, we just wouldn't share any information on this. And I think on the climate, there's a consensus that we need to be much better at talking to each other. So it's also a challenge for us in the private sector.
Thank you, Rafael. We must go on. I will ask Jānis, how about, and how important is to educate and engage society in order to achieve climate change? Could you share your thoughts on that?
I think climate awareness, environmental awareness in general, is always good. It's always good to know why and what, but I think it's also important to understand that there is a gap, sometimes rather big gap, between what you know and what you think and what you can actually do. And this gap can be bridged by the same financial mechanisms, new skills, infrastructure, better policy integration, and so on. So we can not only rely on individuals, on our households, that they will do everything and they will be the leaders. I think we have to build all the social, physical infrastructure around that allows people actually to behave environmentally friendly and climate friendly. And this is I mean, we need wider involvement of stakeholders. It's not just individuals; it's also governments, municipalities, businesses, and so on.
Rafael and James, could you share your expertise and your experience, how things and trends have changed during past years in the UK in referring to environmental friendly lifestyle?
I go first, Rafael.
Yeah.
I'd just like to make a broader point, just connected to some of the previous discussion that links to the question you just put, which is essentially with the global pandemic, the issue of debt and those sobering statistics really hit home. And clearly, we now have the task of trying to do a transition against the backdrop of a lot of build-up of debt. I think the thing that I didn't point out, certainly in the UK, is with the kind of change from an 80% reduction target to a net zero target, the big thing the CCC drew out was actually that the cost would remain the same. That sounds counterintuitive, that costing going from 80% emissions to then net zero actually costs roughly 1 to 2% of GDP. And the reason that cost estimate didn't change with the tighter target in the UK is it's now actually cheaper than we thought it was previously to decarbonise. And that's because a lot of the macro trends, decarbonising energy has actually got a lot cheaper, a lot more quickly than people thought. So there are lots of kind of positive macro kind of trends that are sort of helping to push in the right direction, not to underestimate some of the challenges we have. In respect of things like debt and jobs, the other thing to point out is if you look at the evidence, if you invest in greener measures, you actually get better fiscal returns and multipliers, and you also get more jobs than if you invest in fossil fuel infrastructure. The key challenge, I think, is that the perception by most governments is that they will reach for, if you like, sort of investing in kind of standard standard investments. And so I think the key challenge in terms of when we talk about environment and green, it's not just about loving nature or trying to protect biodiversity. As wonderful those things are and as important as those things are in their own right, actually increasingly it's in our economic self-interest to do so. And I think it's really, the DASCOPTA review in the UK on the sort of value and benefits of biodiversity is just one other example where the UK, I think, is sort of trying to, if you like, really unearth this sort of and change the narrative that climate action is a burden and that you just do it because you love nature, whereas actually really increasingly it's much more about economic self-interest. So I think that's a really important focus, and we increasingly need to kind of change that perception that climate action is a burden and challenge it. Thank you.
Raphael, any comments on that?
Yeah, what I'd add as well with the shift in the UK from our initial target of reducing emissions by 80% to net zero is that when we had an 80% target, I think most businesses would basically say, well, we're part of the 20%, because our industry is way too difficult to decarbonize. So we'll leave it to somebody else to do that 80% piece. And since we've switched to net zero, well, nobody can hide anywhere anymore, and everybody has to be a part of that transition. And that's completely transformed the conversations that I think we're having with government and that government is having with industry. It's transformed the way we think about all the sectors that we're investing in. Because we're no longer thinking, right, steel and cement might get away with slower decarbonization than energy. And now we're thinking, well, actually, we really need to nail this on everything. And I think that's been the really powerful transition towards net zero. And it's brilliant that it's being taken up so widely globally as well ahead of COP. That's really shifting perspectives for sure.
Is society more following the rules, or is proactive and pushing actually policymakers and businesses to continue and contribute actually?
It's a really good question. And I think from where I'm sitting, so individuals are definitely starting to push just in financial terms. I think increasingly pension funds are hearing from the people who pay their pensions into them saying, well, I'll retire after 2050. And so I'd rather you didn't spend my money on things that I don't believe should exist by 2050 anymore. And so pension funds have been under huge pressure from individual investors and their members to start decarbonizing this portfolio. And this is trickling down to asset managers who manage the money from these pension funds are now under huge pressure to also decarbonize their portfolios and go into net zero. So I think a lot of that pressure is definitely coming from individuals. Another area where I see that is recruitment, where if we advertised an oil and gas investment job today, I think we'd struggle to find someone. And when we've recruited for green investment type jobs, especially among young graduates and younger generations, the amount of interest we get is absolutely crazy. And so I think it's demonstrating back to the business that if they want to continue hiring the best talent there is, and especially among younger people, they need to go green, because it'll be part of the due diligence that people do when they take jobs, that they will check our sustainability credentials, and they'll question it in the interview process as well, which is brilliant. So it's, I think we're seeing individuals playing a big role in that transition as well.
Great to hear that. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panel members and our experts about the time that you've given to this great conversation. I think we've learned a lot. We've seen multiple examples how things work in UK, what has been done here in Latvia. And I want to thank our panel members, Chairman of the Board of the Association Zaļā Brīvība Jānis Brīsga, Rafael Valet, from Manager of Sustainable Finance at the Green Investment Group, also Head of EU Climate Policy, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, James Erickson, thank you. And of course, Head of Fissile Energy and Waste Management Work Group, Dace Cyril, for joining our lovely, great conversation. Guys who are watching right now, we will make sure that our experts actually answer your questions just by commenting and typing it back. So your questions will be answered, but we just want to keep all this conversation, all this meetup brief. So that's why this second session has come to an end. Just in 5 minutes, we're going to continue with a game. All right, so we're going to see you back in 5 minutes. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in our online green meetup. Destination COP26 organized by the British Embassy in Latvia. And the time has come to play a game. We are going to have a quiz. It's the third session of our event, Act Green. We are going to have a quiz, very informative and educational. And we are going to have our participants, so ladies and gentlemen, not to cause threat for generations to come. It's important already now to develop climate-friendly habits. But actually, we have understood that it's not that easy to take climate-friendly choices. You need knowledge, you have to be very attentive to detail, and you need awareness. So we have the participants. This quiz was organized in cooperation with the Latvian Fund of Nature and our participants. So we welcome a board member of Zero Waste Latvia Association, Māja Krastiņa, also the head of Association New East, Jorens Dobkovic, has joined us. Welcome. And we also had the head of corporate communications at Latvijas Valsts Meža, Latvian State Forests, Tomas Kotovic. So we welcome participants of our quiz. We are going to have 4 questions, and you will have multiple choice answers. And each speaker has in front of them 5 envelopes with those multiple choice answers. You have actually four envelopes. And I will read the question, and I will give you a 10 to 20 seconds time to choose the best answer. And you will show your answer to our audience. You won't be able to crib from the other participants. You will just have to present your best solution. And this will all be relating to some challenges that we meet every day when we choose environmentally friendly things and take environmentally friendly decisions. Are you ready? We are ready. Off we go. You will have 10 seconds to answer this. The question is as follows: what's better for climate, paper or plastic bags? 10 seconds. Thomas is the first one to answer. Maya. Actually, the background is hindering me, but I am for a paper bag. Jorens is for a plastic bag, and Thomas paper bag. And now, listen attentively. Unfortunately, there's no simple answer whether paper or plastic bags are best for environment. Of course, plastic bags take centuries to decompose and they turn into microplastic and they never disappear. But usually for producing paper bags, more energy is required, so greenhouse gas emissions increase. And also that's promoting climate change. Likewise, in the production of paper bags, forest resources are used, and of course, felling the trees decrease this possibility of forests to be carbon sinks. So to produce a paper bag, much more energy is needed compared to producing a plastic bag from oil. And so this paper bag, which has developed this image of ecologically sound choice, well, it's not that unanimous. The best choice is reusable bags, paper, plastic, or cloth, or canvas bag. It's important to reuse and use them actively. I will ask perhaps now Thomas to comment on this answer and the decision. What is the better choice? Well, as all questions related to environment are very complex, very complicated, and depend on the perspective. I bought myself constantly 4 paper bags because we see in our forests what's happening with plastic bags in the forest, how the forest looks like after lunch in the forest or some kind of recreational events. Of course, what you are saying, our ancestors knew what's the best canvas bag, linen or hemp, proper canvas bag which could be used. Well, in olden times, those sacks sacks were given by grandfather to the grandson, and they were just mended. But if I'm given only these 2 choices, I will choose a paper bag, because I don't think that forests are felled and cut down in order to produce paper bags. No one is taking the soul to get timber to produce paper. This is only a byproduct. Thank you. You will have 20 seconds to answer to the next question. Now, please list the solutions or rank the solutions which would be most effective in the area of food. So the most effective method in fighting against climate change. And you have to mention as number 1 the one method that has the greatest positive impact. So the coolest thing would be number 1, A, composting, B, transition to plant-based food, and decreasing food waste. You have 20 seconds for deciding. Now you have to think about eating salad, composting. 5 seconds to go. 3, 2, 1, and now please your choice. And the best one. But I will explain. I will explain my choice. Maya has chosen decreasing food waste. Joran's composting as the main priority for him, and Thomas has 2. Reducing food waste and transition to plant-based food. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and the audience, the answer is the following. The correct ranking of the answers would be the following. First of all, reducing food waste. B, transition to plant-based food. And C, composting. Because agriculture and husbandry is really a source of emissions. That's why it's important to eat less meat, especially less red meat. But more effective way is to reduce food waste. Don't throw out food. 1/3. When I read this, I felt shocked. Just listen to this. 1/3 of food that we grow and that we create never really ends up on our plates. This is really a disaster. And waste causes approximately 8% of global emissions. So you are not only not eating, but just throwing out food. And the social impact is we see that growing food, producing, transporting, selling food, and we know that also the waste of energy and work is enormous.
And I decided that I'll vote on composting, and I think that it has social implications. If you separate compost from other waste, that would teach you better what it means to sort, separate, and would also lead to patterns that remain long after. I think that composting or the reduction of your food waste is a real practical individual level step towards climate neutrality and better future for ourselves. Because switching to plant-based food, of course, is sort of self-evident, but it is not so easy to convince everyone, especially hell-bent carnivores and that's not too viable. Thank you, Jorens. Let's go to question 3. You'll be given 10 seconds to make up your mind. So which of these is greener, going 10 kilometers by car to a packaging-free shop, or walk to a nearby corner shop where you can buy packaged goods? So 10 seconds starting now. So let's see. Going by car to 10 kilometers, packaging-free shop, or going to your corner store for packaged commodities. And again, well, you started a bad trend. You're starting to cheat. Well, I would like to do the same as Maya did. We need another option. Going by bike to a packaging-free shop, or take your cloth bag. Sack. Yes, I think this is something that you should leave as an inheritance to your children, their children, and their children, and they should be able to fix it. Well, I've been using this for several years, and it's still okay. Can I start? Well, hold on a minute. I have to insert a little comment before I give you the floor. Well, you're absolutely right. This is, again, a tough tie. By reducing disposable plastic, we're helping the environment, but if we want to really make our shopping green, we need to consider other things as well. Using reusable packaging has its advantages. You can avoid using disposable plastic packaging, which needs to be disposed of afterwards, and that comes at a cost. Each time we use our own packaging or bags, we reduce the consumption of the plastic which we would otherwise contribute to. I think this is a very, very nice statement, nice way to put it. If you have any kind of plastic in your hands, you're responsible for that. It's not just something that you throw away, you become responsible for it. But plastic, any plastic wrapping or anything should be reused at least 10, 20 or 100 times before it becomes better in terms of materials used. before we get to the shop, it's important to see what kind of mode of transport we use. Either we'll walk or ride a bike or take a bus to local zero waste shop. That's fine, but if we have to ride 30 minutes, 60 minutes, it's not green at all. As far as vegetables are concerned, disposable plastic wrapping may seem environmentally damaging. For example, take my bananas, put them in the plastic bag. But, in fact, this plastic coating could give longer life to your product, which would mean less waste, less delivery, and less emission. It is also, from the environmental point of view, important to see what kind of systems are used for making the food, and biological farming, of course, should be given preference, and food consumption decisions are some of the toughest decisions that we have, and congratulations on making this tough choice. But let's stick to what matters the most. Buying whatever amount you need, avoid buying twice, 3 times or 4 times more than you would actually need, because that would multiply the packaging that you have used. And please use reusable packaging as much as you possibly can, and mine out over to you. Well, I have an inspiring comment. Try to find a zero waste solution, and the zero waste solution or packaging free solution can be a sort of a neighboring shop, a cornerstone shop where you can buy milk or cottage cheese without packaging. And in many shops you can also find food products without packaging. You just need to keep your eyes open or have your bag with you. So this change is gradually happening. So on a personal level, we're responsible for all kinds of waste that we are generating that ends up in our trash bin, and let's try to avoid generating unnecessary trash or waste. But as my colleague Jānis Brīsks already mentioned in one of the previous interventions during the panel discussion, I would like to echo him. The biggest change or transformation is happening not at the individual or consumer level, should be taking place at the industrial and policy-making level. This transformation should happen there. We shouldn't be forced to buy a product which is wrapped in 5 different packaging, or is not doesn't contain recycled packaging, or cannot be recyclable. There should be choices available to buy something without generating waste, or buy something waste-free or packaging-free. The change is happening, but it needs to pick up the pace. Well, thank you, Maya. The last, 4th question: which of these sectors of the economy contributes to the biggest share of GHG emissions? Transport, construction, manufacturing, agriculture and forestry, electricity and heating. 20 seconds. You can also phone your friends, though you're not allowed to phone your friend. No, you can't phone or call anyone, so you have 10 seconds to make up your mind. 3, 2, 1, and you have to raise the tags now. Construction, says Maya. Joris again has been extremely creative with putting together a list. And agriculture and forestry, Thomas thinks that it's electricity and heating. Thomas, you're absolutely right. Your answer is the correct one, because it is the energy and heating, which is the biggest contributor to GHGs. Electricity and heating contributes to the biggest share of GHGs around the world, or 25% is accountable for 12%. Agriculture, forestry and other land-related industries come close in the second place, and I see Maya raising construction can't, but we'll get to the construction. So second place is agriculture, forestry, farming, forestry, 24%, whereas 21% of the GHGs are generated or emitted by industrial activities, manufacturing that involves fossil fuels, being burnt or used as the fuel to generate power. Transport industry contributes to 40% of GHG emissions because of the fossil fuel that they are using in order to travel by road, rail, air, or sea. Almost 95% of the energy consumed by the transport sector comes from oil-based or petroleum-based fuels, mostly gasoline or petroleum and diesel. So that concludes our quiz. Do you have any comments on the results? Well, I have a comment about Latvia. Around the world, this would be absolutely true because China is mostly coal-fueled and coal-dependent. But considering that this is the biggest contributor, we have wonderful alternative. A tree is like a solar panel and also captures the CO2, and you can get the heat from the trees as well, and you can not really use them to cool down anything, but you can use it also for energy purposes as one of the renewable energy sources, and that's why we can become the greenest country in the world in the next 10 years. And in construction, we can use wood as the material. Energy efficiency of buildings, of course, is very important. Instead of heating, we should reduce the energy consumption rather, or generate energy savings. We should use the energy much more efficiently. Yes, the thing about the energy efficiency is if you have an energy efficient house or zero house, if you combine it with heating, the idea of a passive house, rather, is to reduce the energy consumption. If you have an energy-efficient building and if it is fueled on renewables, then you will probably do without timber, either in the form of firewood or material. So congratulations to all participants of our quiz. Thank you very much for taking part in our quiz. Your answers, your take on these questions, issues. We would like to have your concluding remarks as well, your wishes, comments to our viewers on how to become greener, more environmentally friendly. We'll start with Maya. Well, this quiz was very exciting. I really sort of got the taste of it and could go on forever. But what I wanted to underline is that, the discussion and solutions that we are talking about, in order to have a very precise answer, you should have the figures and the estimates, and you should analyze each product life cycle and so on and so forth. What matters most is that we should be more aware of these issues, of these problems, and that's the very purpose of the quiz, to think about where the sectors that are contributing most in terms of emissions or pollution. And we must look for solutions together globally, and I hope that policy makers and everyone who's involved in making those policy decisions will soon come to more ambitious goals as well. Thank you. Jorens, what would you wish our viewers? So, in the meanwhile, while we're waiting for political solutions on waste separation and sorting and so on and so forth, or depositing system, we must start with by changing how we behave. You can call your waste management company and ask them whether they can take your glass if you sort it or separate it, or plastic if you separate it and sort it. They probably are not ready in terms of infrastructure, but they could do it. So don't be afraid to apply this pressure and pressure them and ask them, how they can make our life better and how they can help us make the world better as soon as possible, because there's a multitude of opportunities or options. We have various international organizations that can, suggest better ways of handling our waste around the world, and can give clearer suggestions to various groups of society. Let's not be afraid to test things and try out things, to go out there and try new things. Thomas, anything to add? Well, there's nothing really much to add for me, but that's, how that should go. We should start with ourselves, thinking about smarter choices, on an individual levels. You see how tough it is to decide whether you should travel by car 10 kilometers or go by bike, which would be environmentally friendly. But it's very cold outside. It's below zero. You can't really go by bike. You have to start with yourself, and you have to start thinking greener yourself. And once you develop those green thinking patterns, it will pressure the politicians into green thinking as well, because politicians do have to respect what people think, what they think is relevant, what is important for them, and what they insist on. And that's when the big decisions will follow. Latvia has all the chance of becoming the greenest country in the world, everything that is needed there, because we're a small country, we have wonderful land and favorable climate conditions, and very few people to make this transformation quickly. So once again, thank you all for taking part in the quiz. Would like to remind you that we had Maya Krastina, Zero Waste Board member, Thomas Kotovic from the Latvia's Valsts Mēži Communication Department, and Joris Topkovic from the Association of Youth taking part in this quiz. Just to recap what we discussed over these 3 sessions and the issues that we covered during the quiz. Well, to recap, we have to start with ourselves. We're often shy and think that we are not going to be able to instigate any change, but we have, various charity campaigns like Angels and Latvia, and different charity campaigns where you can donate 1 or 2 euros, and then at the end you find out that those organizers have been able to help a lot of people. So we should start with ourselves by becoming greener in our behaviors, everyday behaviors, attitudes, and way we do things. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We'd like to remind you that this was the first online green meetup destination, COP26, COP26, hosted by British Embassy Riga. Thank you for joining us.